In the winter of 1944, Corporal Takeshi Yamamoto was captured on Saipan, fully expecting torture and execution because in Imperial Japan, surrender meant dishonor worse than death. But when American guards handed back his Buddhist prayer beads and later built him a meditation room inside the POW camp, his entire understanding of the enemy and the war itself shattered in ways no battle ever could. What did Japanese prisoners discover behind the barbed wire that made them realize their own government had been lying to them all along? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In the summer of 1944, the Pacific Ocean was a graveyard. Young men died on beaches with names most Americans could not pronounce. They died in jungles so thick the sun never reached the ground. They died on ships that exploded into metal rain. And they died believing things that were not true. Corporal Takeshi Yamamoto was 23 years old when his war ended on Saipan. He grew up in a fishing village on Shikoku Island where everyone knew everyone else. His father fixed nets. His mother sold fish at the market. The Buddhist temple sat on a small hill overlooking the harbor, and every morning the bell rang across the water. Takeshi went to that temple every week of his childhood. The old priest taught him to sit still and breathe. His mother gave him wooden prayer beads when he left for the army. She tied them around his wrist and cried. The army changed everything. Officers screamed that surrender was worse than death. They said Americans would torture prisoners and cut off their fingers one by one. They said real Japanese soldiers fought until their last breath. Takeshi saw men charge into machine gun fire because retreating meant shame. He saw his sergeant shoot a wounded soldier who could not walk anymore. Better dead than captured, the sergeant said. Japan was starving. Rice rations got smaller every month. The government took all the metal they could find. Church bells, cooking pots, even the bronze Buddha statues from some temples. Everything became bullets and bombs. Takeshi's little sister wrote him letters about being hungry all the time. His father's boat had no fuel. The entire village survived on seaweed soup and whatever fish the old men could catch from shore. When the Americans landed on Saipan in June, Takeshi's unit had been there for 8 months. They lived in caves and ate moss when the food ran out. American planes dropped bombs every day. The ground shook so hard that Takeshi's teeth rattled. His best friend died when a shell collapsed their bunker. Takeshi dug for 6 hours but only found one boot. On July 7th, his commanding officer ordered a final charge. Thousands of Japanese soldiers ran screaming toward American lines with bayonets and empty rifles. Some had only bamboo spears. Takeshi ran because everyone else did. He ran because stopping meant getting shot by his own officers. He made it 30 meters before something hit his leg and he fell. He woke up hours later with his hands tied behind his back and an American medic wrapping his thigh. He thought they would kill him immediately. He closed his eyes and waited for the bullet. Instead, they put him on a truck. The shame crashed over him like a wave. He was alive and captured. His mother would never recover from the disgrace. His father would tell people his son died in battle rather than admit the truth. Takeshi touched the prayer beads still somehow on his wrist and wondered if Buddha would forgive him for being too weak to die. The Americans moved him from ship to ship, then to Hawaii, then on to another ship. Other prisoners whispered rumors. Someone heard the Americans ate prisoners. Someone else said they used them for medical experiments. An older soldier said Americans had no honor and would work them to death in mines. Takeshi stayed quiet and touched his prayer beads when no one was looking. In December 1944, the transport truck drove through Wisconsin. Takeshi had never seen snow before. It covered everything like a white blanket. Farmhouses sat in the middle of huge fields with red barns and silos taller than any building in his village. The farms looked completely untouched. No bomb craters, no burnt trees, no destroyed homes. The war was not here at all. Takeshi tried to imagine American planes bombing these farms and could not. He tried to imagine these farmers starving and could not. Everything looked solid and permanent and wealthy in ways that made his stomach hurt. Camp McCoy appeared through the truck windows. Wooden barracks in neat rows. Fences with wire on top. Guard towers. American soldiers walking around like this was just another job. The truck stopped and guards pulled the prisoners out into the cold. Takeshi's leg still hurts from the wound. He limped toward a building where they would process him. Inside, an American sergeant sat at a desk. He was maybe 40 years old with red hair and freckles. He looked bored. He gestured for Takeshi to empty his pockets. Takeshi had nothing except the prayer beads on his wrist. He hesitated, then held out his arm. The sergeant looked at the beads. They were simple wood, worn smooth from years of use. 48 small spheres on a string with one larger bead at the end. His mother's hands had touched them. The temple priest had blessed them. They were all Takeshi had left home. The sergeant reached for them, and Takeshi's heart dropped. He was about to lose the last piece of his life before the war. He was about to lose his mother's gift. He was about to lose proof that he was once a person who prayed and believed in something. The sergeant reached for them, and Takeshi's heart dropped. He held them up to the light and turned them over in his thick fingers. He looked at them for what felt like an hour, but was probably 10 seconds. Then he set them on the desk and wrote something on a form. He looked at Takeshi. He pointed at the beads. He pointed at a box on the shelf behind him. Then he said something in English that Takeshi did not understand. But the sergeant's tone was not angry. It was not cruel. It was just neutral and maybe a little kind. Another guard came over and spoke some broken Japanese. "Your things will be returned after processing," he said. "You will get them back." Takeshi stared. Get them back? The prayer beads? His Buddhist prayer beads? The Americans were going to give them back? The guard nodded. He pointed at the box again. "Safe, there," he said. Something inside Takeshi cracked. Not broke, just cracked. Like ice on a pond when the sun hits it wrong. Everything he had been told about the Americans, everything his officers screamed, everything the propaganda films showed, none of it prepared him for this small moment of basic human decency. They were not destroying his religion. They were not mocking his faith. They were putting his prayer beads in a box and promising to return them. Takeshi walked out of that processing room and into the winter cold, and he could not stop thinking about the sergeant's bored face and the casual promise, "You will get them back." Such simple words. Such an impossible thing to believe. The first meal hit Takeshi like a physical blow. The guards marched the new prisoners into a long building with rows of tables and bright electric lights. The smell reached him before he saw the food. Meat cooking, bread baking, something sweet he couldn't identify. His stomach twisted so hard he almost fell over. American soldiers in white aprons stood behind a long metal counter. They held serving spoons the size of small shovels. Takeshi picked up a metal tray divided into sections. He had no idea what to do. The prisoner in front of him moved forward, and an American plopped a huge piece of meat onto his tray. Then potatoes whipped into white clouds. Then green beans. Then 2 slices of bread so white it looked fake. Then an orange. Takeshi stared at the orange. A whole orange, not a slice, not a dried piece. A whole, fresh orange that probably weighed half a pound. He had not seen a whole orange since before the war started. His sister had not eaten an orange in 3 years. His mother sold fish for 12 hours a day and could not afford oranges. He looked at the American server. The man was young, maybe 20. He had an easy smile. He put the orange on Takeshi's tray like it was nothing. Like oranges grew on trees in unlimited numbers, and anyone could have one whenever they wanted, which Takeshi suddenly realized might actually be true here. Takeshi sat down at a table with other Japanese prisoners. Nobody spoke. They all stared at their trays. One man started crying. Another man picked up the bread and squeezed it like he thought it might disappear. A third man ate his entire meal in under 2 minutes and then ran outside and vomited in the snow. Takeshi ate slowly. The roast beef tasted better than anything he remembered. The potatoes were hot and had real butter melting on top. Butter! He had not seen butter in 4 years. The green beans were soft and seasoned with something that might have been bacon. Each bite felt like a lie. Each bite made him angry. His sister was starving, and these Americans were feeding their enemies like honored guests. He saved the orange for last. He peeled it carefully, and the smell made his eyes water. The juice ran down his fingers. He ate one section at a time and tried to make it last forever. When he finished, he folded the peels into his pocket. He did not know why. Maybe to prove this had been real. 3 weeks later, Takeshi got sick. The Wisconsin winter was colder than anything in Japan. His leg wound had not healed right, and he developed a fever that made his teeth chatter. The guards took him to the camp hospital, which was just another barrack with more beds and medical equipment. The doctor was an older man with gray hair and glasses. He wore a U.S. Army uniform with a medical patch. He examined Takeshi's leg and frowned. He said something to a nurse, and she brought over a small glass bottle with clear liquid inside. The doctor filled a needle and jabbed it into Takeshi's arm. Then he covered Takeshi with 2 heavy wool blankets that smelled clean. Takeshi had been in a Japanese field hospital after training. He watched doctors amputate legs without anything for pain because they needed to save the morphine for officers. He saw men with infections die slowly because medicine was too valuable to waste on regular soldiers. He saw doctors ignore the screaming because there were too many wounded and not enough supplies. This American doctor gave him penicillin. Takeshi did not know what penicillin was, but another prisoner told him later it was a miracle drug that cost a lot of money. The Americans were spending money to save an enemy soldier's infected leg. They were using their valuable medicine on someone who had been trying to kill them 6 months ago. The doctor came back every day for a week. He spoke some broken Japanese from a small phrase book he carried. He tried to make jokes that Takeshi did not understand. He smiled a lot. On the 4th day, he brought Takeshi a cup of coffee with sugar and cream. Real sugar, real cream. For a prisoner? For an enemy? Takeshi's fever broke on the 7th day. His legs started healing. He went back to his barrack and could not stop thinking about the doctor's phrase book. The man was learning Japanese. He was trying to talk to his patients. He cared enough to try. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. In February, the prisoners got work assignments. Takeshi and 30 other men rode in a truck to a local cannery that processed vegetables. The American foreman showed them what to do. Sort potatoes, load crates. Simple work that paid a small amount of money in camp script they could use at the canteen. Takeshi watched American women working the canning machines. The machines were huge and loud and processed hundreds of cans per hour. One woman operated controls that did the work of 50 people. The potatoes moved on conveyor belts that never stopped. Everything was automatic and fast and efficient in ways that seemed impossible. He did math in his head. If Japan had these machines, they would not need to invade China for farmland. If Japan had this kind of industrial power, they would not need to attack anyone for resources. His brother died in Manchuria fighting for land to grow food. But America had so much food, they built giant machines just to make the extra vegetables. Takeshi worked next to a prisoner named Hiro who had been a factory worker in Osaka. Hiro watched the machines with his mouth open. He whispered that Japan's best factories were maybe 1/10 this efficient, maybe less. He said Japan's entire industrial production could not match what he saw in this one small Wisconsin cannery. That night in the barrack, Takeshi lay on his bed and tried to understand. Japan told them they were winning the war. Japan told them Americans were weak and soft. Japan told them suffering made them superior. But Japan was starving and America was throwing away food. Japan was melting temple bells for bullets and America was giving prisoners oranges. Japan left wounded soldiers to die and America was wasting penicillin on enemies. In April, a red truck arrived at the camp. Coca-Cola was painted on the side in white letters. Guards unloaded crates of glass bottles filled with dark, fizzy liquid. They brought the crates to the canteen where prisoners could buy them with their work script. 10 cents for a bottle of soda. Takeshi bought one because he had never seen anything like it. The bottle was cold and wet with condensation. He opened it and tasted something sweet and bubbly and completely unnecessary. It was sugar water with bubbles. It had no nutrition. It served no purpose except to taste good. And America made so much of it they could sell it to prisoners in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin. He held that cold bottle and thought about Japan melting Buddha statues for ammunition. He thought about his mother going hungry so soldiers could eat. He thought about every sacrifice and hardship and noble suffering his country demanded. And America was giving captured enemies luxury soda pop like it meant nothing. One evening in May, Takeshi made a decision that terrified him. He found the camp chaplain, a Lutheran minister named Reverend Peterson. Takeshi's English was still very bad. He used hand gestures and simple words. He asked if maybe there was a place to meditate, to practice Buddhism. He knew it was crazy. He knew they would say no, but he had to ask. Reverend Peterson looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled and said, "Let me see what I can do." Takeshi walked back to his barrack in the spring twilight and felt that crack inside him widen just a little more. 2 weeks later, Reverend Peterson found Takeshi at the canteen. He motioned for Takeshi to follow him. They walked across the camp to Barrack 7, the old storage building that nobody used much anymore. Peterson unlocked the door and pushed it open. Inside, someone had cleared out a small room at the back. The floor was clean, the walls were bare wood, but they looked freshly swept. In the corner sat a stack of cushions, the kind Americans used for outdoor furniture. Against the far wall, someone had placed a low wooden shelf. On the shelf sat 3 smooth river stones, a small bundle of dried flowers in a jar, and a white candle. Peterson smiled and gestured around the room. He said something in English that Takeshi did not fully understand, but the meaning was clear. "This is yours. This is for you and the others. You can pray here." Takeshi stood in the doorway and could not move. His throat felt tight. He had asked for a space to meditate as a crazy hope, expecting nothing. But this American minister had actually done it. He had cleaned a room. He had found cushions. He had made an altar with stones and flowers. For Buddhist prisoners, for enemies. Peterson put his hand on Takeshi's shoulder for just a moment, then left him alone in the quiet room. Takeshi knelt on one of the cushions. The position felt strange after so many months. His knees hurt, his back was stiff. But he folded his hands and closed his eyes and tried to remember what the old priest taught him. Breathe in. Breathe out. Let the thoughts come and go like clouds. Tears ran down his face before he could stop them. They dripped off his chin onto his shirt. He was not sad exactly. He was not happy exactly. He was something else, something he did not have words for. He was broken open in a way that hurt and healed at the same time. Other Buddhist prisoners started using the room. Word spread quietly through the barracks. An old man named Sato had been a priest at a temple in Kyoto before the war. He knew all the proper prayers and ceremonies. He led simple services on Sunday mornings. 12 or 15 men would gather in the small room and sit in silence together. Sometimes Sato would chant, sometimes they just breathed. The American guards walked past the windows and never bothered them. Nobody made fun of them, nobody told them to stop. The guards just nodded and kept walking. One guard even removed his hat when he walked past the window during a service. Takeshi could not make sense of it. In Japan, officers forced soldiers to worship the emperor like a god. They made everyone bow to the imperial palace no matter where they were. They said Buddhism and Christianity were weak foreign religions that made men soft. Takeshi watched officers beat soldiers for praying to Buddha instead of focusing on military duty. But here, in this American prison camp, the enemy gave them cushions and candles and privacy. The enemy respected their faith more than their own commanders had. The enemy treated Buddha Dharma like it mattered. One night after meditation, Takeshi sat on his bunk and tried to write down his thoughts in a small notebook the canteen sold. His handwriting was messy and his thoughts were messier. He wrote, "They let us pray to our gods while we pray for their defeat. What kind of enemy does this?" He thought about the propaganda films he watched during training. Americans ripping babies from mothers. Americans torturing prisoners with electric shocks. Americans with devil faces and animal teeth. But the Americans he met gave him oranges and penicillin and a room to meditate. They smiled easily. They made jokes. They seemed bored by the war, like it was just a job they wanted to finish so they could go home. Takeshi remembered his sergeant shooting the wounded soldier rather than let him be captured. "Better dead than shamed," the sergeant said. But there was no shame here. There was just boredom and routine and a strange casual kindness that felt more dangerous than any weapon. In August, the news came through the camp like electricity. Japan had surrendered. The war was over. Atomic bombs had destroyed 2 cities. The emperor himself spoke on the radio and told everyone to stop fighting. It was finished. The prisoners gathered in small groups and whispered. Some men cried. Some men looked relieved. Some men looked lost, like they had no idea what to do now. Takeshi felt empty and full at the same time. He would not die in this camp. He would go home eventually. But home to what? On Thanksgiving in November, the Americans held a huge feast for everyone, including the prisoners. The mess hall filled with smells that made Takeshi dizzy. Roasted turkey, which Takeshi had never eaten before. Mashed potatoes with gravy. Something orange called sweet potatoes with melted marshmallows on top. Bread rolls with butter. Cranberry sauce that was sweet and sour at the same time. And pie. 3 different kinds of pie with cream on top. An American officer stood up and gave a speech. Takeshi did not understand all the words, but he caught some of them. Grateful, home, peace, future. The officer talked about being thankful and going home to families. He looked at the Japanese prisoners when he said it, like they were included, like they also had families to go home to. Like they were also human beings who deserved to see their mothers again. Takeshi sat with his plate piled high with food and felt something inside him collapse completely. Not break, collapse, like a building falling down. All the propaganda, all the training, all the things his officers screamed about American devils and Japanese superiority, it all fell down and turned to dust. The abundance was not a trick. It was not meant to be cruel. It was just normal here. This was how Americans lived every day. They had so much food, they invented a holiday just to eat too much and be thankful for it. They had so much of everything, they could afford to be kind to enemies. Takeshi ate his turkey and thought about his sister going hungry. He thought about his village where people survived on seaweed soup. He thought about Japan stripping temples and factories for metal to make bombs. All that sacrifice, all that noble suffering, and they lost to a country that served pie to prisoners. That night, Takeshi wrote in his notebook again, His English was better now after months of practice. He wrote, "Today I understood. We were not defeated by better soldiers. We were defeated by a nation so wealthy they could afford mercy. In Japan, we were told sacrifice and suffering made us superior. But what if prosperity and compassion are not weakness? What if we were the poor ones pretending to be rich, while they were rich enough to act poor?" Takeshi ate his turkey and thought about his sister going hungry. He thought about his village where people survived on seaweed soup. He thought about Japan stripping temples and factories for metal to make bombs. All that sacrifice, all that noble suffering, and they lost to a country that served pie to prisoners? That night, Takeshi wrote in his notebook again. His English was better now after months of practice. He wrote, "Today I understood. We were not defeated by better soldiers. We were defeated by a nation so wealthy they could afford mercy. In Japan, we were told sacrifice and suffering made us superior. But what if prosperity and compassion are not weakness? What if we were the poor ones pretending to be rich, while they were rich enough to act poor?" He sat on his bunk and looked at his prayer beads, the ones the sergeant had returned to him after processing, just like he promised. He touched each wooden sphere and thought about what the old priest used to say. The path to enlightenment is seeing things as they really are, not as we wish them to be. Takeshi was beginning to see things as they really were, and it was more terrifying than any battle he ever fought. The repatriation ship arrived at Yokohama port in March 1946. Takeshi stood on the deck with 300 other former prisoners and watched Japan appear through the morning fog. He had dreamed about this moment for 2 years. He had imagined the green hills of home and his mother's face and the smell of the ocean near his village. But what he saw made his stomach drop. The port was destroyed. Burned buildings stood like black teeth against the sky. Cranes lay twisted in the water. Half the docks were gone completely. American military trucks drove everywhere, hauling supplies and equipment. Japanese workers in ragged clothes moved like ghosts, thin and gray and quiet. The ship docked, and the former prisoners walked down the gangway onto Japanese soil. Takeshi's legs shook. Some men knelt and kissed the ground. Others just stood there looking around at the destruction. Nobody cheered, nobody smiled. They had come home to a country that did not exist anymore. Takeshi carried everything he owned in a small canvas bag. His prayer beads were wrapped in a clean handkerchief in his pocket, where he could feel them. He had an English-Japanese dictionary that Reverend Peterson gave him as a goodbye gift. The Reverend had written inside the cover, "May you find peace and understanding." He had a photograph of the meditation room in Barrack 7 that another prisoner took with a borrowed camera. And at the bottom of his bag, wrapped carefully in wax paper, he had 3 cans of Spam and 4 chocolate bars from his last Red Cross parcel. He had been saving them. The processing center gave him papers and a train ticket to Shikoku. They gave him a thin coat because his old one was gone. They gave him 200 yen, which was almost nothing. Then they sent him out into the ruins of Yokohama to find his way to the train station. Takeshi walked through streets he did not recognize. Every other building was destroyed or damaged. People lived in shacks made from scraps of metal and wood. Children with hollow faces watched him pass. An old woman sat on the curb crying. The smell of smoke and sewage hung in the cold air. This was the great Japanese Empire. This was the country that was supposed to win the war and rule Asia. It looked like the end of the world. The train to Shikoku was packed with people. Everyone was thin. Everyone wore patched clothes. A man near Takeshi coughed blood into a rag. A woman held a baby that barely moved. The train smelled like unwashed bodies and sickness. Takeshi closed his eyes and remembered the clean barracks at Camp McCoy. He remembered hot showers and soap. He remembered the hospital ward where the doctor wasted penicillin on him. The contrast hit him so hard he felt dizzy. His village looked smaller than he remembered. Half the boats in the harbor were gone. The fish market was mostly empty. The temple on the hill had lost its roof to bombing. American planes had hit the island during the final months of the war, dropping bombs on anything that moved. The old priest was dead. The bell was gone, melted down 3 years ago for bullets that did not save anyone. Takeshi's mother opened the door and screamed. She grabbed him and would not let go. She was so thin he could feel every bone in her back. His father came out and stood there crying without making any sound. His sister was 14 now, almost a woman, but she weighed less than when she was 10. They all stood in the doorway holding each other while neighbors gathered to stare. That night, Takeshi gave them Spam and chocolate. His mother cried again. His sister ate one chocolate bar so fast she got sick. His father held a can of Spam and turned it over in his hands like it was made of gold. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "From the Americans," Takeshi said. "They gave us Red Cross parcels every month." His family stared at him. "The Americans gave you food?" His mother's voice was strange. "You were a prisoner," she said. "Prisoners do not get gifts." Takeshi tried to explain. He told them about the mess hall with oranges and butter. He told them about the hospital and the doctor who used expensive medicine on enemies. He told them about Coca-Cola trucks and Thanksgiving dinner and the meditation room. He told them about machines that did the work of 50 people and farms that were not touched by war. He told them the truth about what he saw. His father looked down at the floor. His mother's face went hard. His sister asked if Americans really had machines that washed clothes automatically. "Yes," Takeshi said, "they have those. They have everything." Nobody knew what to say. The silence felt heavy. Finally, his father spoke. "We were told prisoners were tortured. We were told you would be worked to death or starved. The government said Americans were animals." "They lied," Takeshi said quietly, "about everything." His mother made him promise not to talk about his time as a prisoner outside the family. The shame was too much, she said. People would not understand. They would think he was a traitor or a liar. They would think he was weak for being captured. Better to say he was wounded and recovered in a hospital until the war ended. Better to never mention Camp McCoy or Wisconsin or any of it. Takeshi agreed because he had no choice. But at night, he lay awake in his childhood room and touched his prayer beads and thought about the meditation room and Reverend Peterson's kind face. He thought about the sergeant who gave back his beads on the first day. He thought about the doctor with the phrasebook. He thought about the easy way Americans smiled and made jokes, like the war was just an unfortunate disagreement between neighbors. The village temple eventually got a new priest, a younger man who had been too sick to fight. Takeshi went to see him and brought a photograph of the meditation room. He told the priest about practicing Buddhism as a prisoner in America. The priest looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he said something that Takeshi never forgot. Perhaps Buddha taught them compassion before he taught us. Takeshi became a schoolteacher. He taught English and history to children who were born during or after the war. He never spoke publicly about being a prisoner. The shame culture was too strong. Former prisoners were looked down on. People whispered about them. Some men changed their names and moved away to start over where nobody knew their history. But in private, in his classroom, Takeshi taught his students that strength was not only about fighting. He taught them that a country's real power was measured by how it treated the powerless. He taught them that propaganda was dangerous and that they should always question what the government told them. He never said where he learned these lessons, but he taught them anyway. In the 1950s, Japan began to rebuild with American help. The same Americans who had been enemies now sent advisors and money and equipment. They helped build factories and schools and hospitals. Some Japanese people were angry about this. They felt humiliated. But Takeshi watched American advisors arrive and was not surprised at all. He remembered the Coca-Cola truck and the mechanized farms and the casual abundance that seemed impossible. He knew what America could do when it wanted to help instead of destroy. Takeshi got married and had 3 children. He told them stories about the war, but not the stories other fathers told. He did not talk about brave charges or honorable death. He talked about a meditation room in Wisconsin and a Lutheran minister who respected Buddha. He talked about a doctor who wasted medicine on enemies. He talked about learning that the world was bigger and stranger and more complicated than anyone told him. In 1978, a university student came to interview old veterans for a research project. Takeshi was 57 years old. The student asked what he learned from the war. Takeshi touched his prayer beads, the same ones his mother gave him in 1942, and thought for a long time before answering. In that Wisconsin prison camp, he said, I learned the most dangerous thing you can teach an enemy, that their system works, not through propaganda, but through hot meals and the freedom to pray. They did not break my spirit. They fed it, literally and spiritually. When I came home and saw Japan starving, I finally understood why we lost. You cannot defeat an enemy who can afford to be kind. The student wrote this down and asked if Takeshi regretted being captured. Takeshi looked out the window at his village, rebuilt and prosperous now, filled with cars and televisions and washing machines, filled with the visible proof of everything he learned in America 34 years ago. No, he said, being captured saved my life. But more than that, it opened my eyes. And once your eyes are open, you can never close them again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.